Aldous Huxley's Island, part 13. Near the end of chapter 6, anyway. Tell me something about Lord Aldehyde. Well, as the Rani said, he's remarkably generous. I'm not interested in his virtues, only his intelligence. How bright is he? Bright enough to know that nobody does anything for nothing. Good, said Mr. Bahu. And tell him from me that for effective work by experts in strategic positions, he must be prepared to lay out at least 10 times what he's going to pay you. I'll write him a letter to that effect. And do it today, Mr. Bahu advised. The plane leaves Shivapuram tomorrow evening, and there won't be another outgoing mail for a whole week. Thank you for telling me, said Will. And now, Her Highness and the shockable stripling being gone, let's move on to the next temptation. What about sex? With the gesture of a man who tries to rid himself of a cloud of importunate insects, Mr. Bahu waved a brown and bony hand back and forth in front of his face. Just a distraction, that's all. Just a nagging, humiliating vexation. But an intelligent man can always cope with it. How difficult it is, said Will, to understand another man's vices. You're right, everybody should stick to the insanity that God has seen fit to curse him with. Pecca fortiter, that was Luther's advice. But make a point of sinning your own sins, not someone else's. And above all, don't do what the people of this island do. Don't try to behave as though you are essentially sane and naturally good. We're all demented sinners in the same cosmic boat, and the boat is perpetually sinking. In spite of which, no rat is justified in leaving it. Is that what you're saying? A few of them may sometimes try to leave, but they never get very far. History and the other rats will always see to it that they drown with the rest of us. That's why Parlour doesn't have the ghost of a chance. Carrying a tray, the little nurse re-entered the room. Buddhist food, she said, as she tied a napkin round Will's neck. All except the fish, but we've decided that fishes are vegetables within the meaning of the act. Will started to eat. Apart from the Rani and Murugan and us two here, he asked after swallowing the first mouthful, how many people from the outside have you ever met? Well, there was that group of American doctors, she answered. They came to Shivapuram last year, while I was working at the Central Hospital. What were they doing here? They wanted to find out why we have such a low rate of neurosis and cardiovascular trouble. Those doctors, she shook her head. I tell you, Mr. Farnaby, they really made my hair stand on end. Made everybody's hair stand on end in the whole hospital. So you think our medicine's pretty primitive? That's the wrong word. It isn't primitive. It's 50% terrific and 50% non-existent. Marvellous antibiotics, but absolutely no methods for increasing resistance, so that antibiotics won't be necessary. Fantastic operations, but when it comes to teaching people the way of going through life without having to be chopped up, absolutely nothing. And it's the same all along the line. Alpha plus for patching you up when you've started to fall apart, but delta minus for keeping you healthy. Apart from sewage systems and synthetic vitamins, you don't seem to do anything at all about prevention. And yet you've got a proverb, prevention is better than cure. But cure, said Will, is so much more dramatic than prevention, and for the doctors it's also a lot more profitable. Maybe for your doctors, said the little nurse. Not for ours. Ours get paid for keeping people well. How is it done? We've been asking that question for 100 years and we found a lot of answers. Chemical answers, psychological answers, answers in terms of what you eat, how you make love, what you see and hear, how you feel about being who you are in this kind of world. And which are the best answers? None of them is best without the others. So there's no panacea? How can there be? And she quoted the little rhyme that every student nurse had to learn by heart on the first day of her training. I am a crowd, obeying as many laws as it has members. Chemically impure are all my beings. There's no single cure for what can never have a single cause. So whether it's prevention or whether it's cure, we attack on all the fronts at once. All the fronts, she insisted. From diet to autosuggestion, from negative ions to meditation. Very sensible, was Will's comment. Perhaps a little too sensible, said Mr. Bahu. Did you ever try to talk sense to a maniac? Will shook his head. I did once. He lifted the greying lock that slanted obliquely across his forehead. Just below the hairline, a jagged scar stood out, strangely pale against the brown skin. Luckily for me, the bottle he hit me with was pretty flimsy. Smoothing his ruffled hair, he turned to the little nurse. Don't ever forget, Miss Rada, to the senseless nothing is more maddening than sense. Parla is a small island completely surrounded by 2,900 million mental cases. So be aware of being too rational. In the country of the insane, the integrated man doesn't become king. Mr. Balhu's face was positively twinkling with Voltairean glee. He gets lynched. Will laughed perfunctorily, and turned again to the little nurse. Don't you have any candidates for the asylum? He asked. Just as many as you have. I mean, in proportion to the population. At least that's what the textbook says. So living in a sensible world doesn't seem to make any difference. Not to the people with the kind of body chemistry that will turn them into psychotics. They're born vulnerable. Little troubles that other people hardly notice can bring them down. We're just beginning to find out what it is that makes them so vulnerable. We're beginning to be able to spot them in advance of a breakdown. And once they've been spotted, we can do something to raise their resistance. Prevention again, and of course, on all the fronts at once. So being born into a sensible world will make a difference even for the predestined psychotic? And for the neurotics it has already made a difference. Your neurosis rate is about 1 in 5 or even 4. Ours is about 1 in 20. The one that breaks down gets treatment on all fronts, and the 19 who don't break down have had prevention on all the fronts. Which brings me back to those American doctors. 3 of them were psychiatrists, and one of the psychiatrists smoked cigars without stopping and had a German accent. He was the one that was chosen to give us a lecture. What a lecture! The little nurse held her head between her hands. I never heard anything like it. What was it about? About the way they treat people with neurotic symptoms. We just couldn't believe our ears. They never attack on all the fronts. They only attack on about half of one front. So far as they're concerned, the physical fronts don't exist. Except for a mouth and an anus, the patient doesn't have a body. He isn't an organism. He wasn't born with a constitution or a temperament. All he has is the 2 ends of a digestive tube, a family, and a psyche. But what sort of a psyche? Obviously not the whole mind, not the mind as it really is. How could it be that when they take no account of a person's anatomy or biochemistry or physiology? Mind abstracted from body, that's the only front they attack on not even on the whole of that front. The man with the cigar kept talking about the unconscious, but the only unconscious they ever pay attention to is the negative unconscious, the garbage that people have tried to get rid of by burying it in the basement. Not a single word about the positive unconscious, no attempt to help the patient to open himself up to the life force or the Buddha nature, and no attempt even to teach him to be a little more conscious in his everyday life. You know, here and now, boys, attention. And no attempt even to teach him to be a little more... She gave an imitation of the minor birds. These people just leave the unfortunate neurotic to wallow in his old bad habits of never being all there in present time. The whole thing is just pure idiocy. No, the man with the cigar didn't even have that excuse. He was as clever can be. So it's not idiocy. It must be something voluntary, something self-induced, like getting drunk, or talking yourself into believing some piece of foolishness because it happens to be in the scriptures. And then look at their idea of what's normal. Believe it or not, a normal human being is one who can have an orgasm and is adjusted to his society. Once again the little nurse held her head between her hands. It's unimaginable. No question about what you do with your orgasms. No question about the quality of your feelings and thoughts and perceptions. And then what about the society you're supposed to be adjusted to? Is it a mad society or a sane one? And even if it's pretty sane, is it right that anybody should be completely adjusted to it? With another of his twinkling smiles, "Those whom God would destroy," said the ambassador, "he first makes mad. Or alternatively, and perhaps even more effectively, he first makes them sane." Mr. Bahu rose and walked to the window. "My car has come for me. I must be getting back to Shivapuram and my desk." He turned to Will and treated him to a long and flowery farewell. Then, switching off the ambassador, "Don't forget to write that letter," he said. "It's very important." He smiled conspiratorially and, passing his thumb back and forth across the first two fingers of his right hand, he counted out invisible money. "Thank goodness," said the little nurse when he had gone. "What was his offence?" Will inquired. "The usual thing. Offering money to someone you want to go to bed with, but she doesn't like you, so you offer more. Is that usual where he comes from?" "Profoundly usual," Will assured her. "Well, I didn't like it." "So I could see. And here's another question. What about Murugan? What makes you ask?" "Curiosity. I noticed that you'd met before. Was that when he was here 2 years ago without his mother?" "How did you know about that?" "A little bird told me, or rather an extremely massive bird. The Rani. She must have made it sound like Sodom and Gomorrah. But unfortunately I was spared the lurid details. Dark hints, that was all she gave me. Hints, for example, about veteran Messalinas giving lessons in love to innocent young boys. And did he need those lessons? Hints, too, about a precocious and promiscuous girl of his own age." Nurse Apu burst out laughing. "Did you know her?" "The precocious and promiscuous girl was me." "You? Does the Rani know it?" "Murugan only gave her the facts, not the names, for which I'm very grateful. You see, I'd behaved pretty badly, losing my head about someone I didn't really love and hurting someone I did. Why is one so stupid?" "The heart has its reasons," said Will, "and the endocrines have theirs." Theirs was a long silence. He finished the last of his cold boiled fish and vegetables. Nurse Apu handed him a plate of fruit salad. "You've never seen Murugan in white satin pyjamas," she said. "Have I missed something? You have no idea how beautiful he looks in white satin pyjamas. Nobody has any right to be so beautiful. It's indecent. It's taking an unfair advantage."